The chairman hadn't cried in 4 years. Not at the funeral. Not when they packed her clothes. But standing in the middle of a crowded orphanage hallway, surrounded by noise and strangers, something stopped him completely. A small girl, maybe 5, maybe 6, was walking away. Around her neck hung something silver. Something he hadn't seen since the night his wife didn't come home. His hand reached out before his mind could stop it. Where did you get that? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Chairman Renshaw had visited 12 charity events in the last 3 months. He couldn't remember a single face from any of them. That wasn't cruelty. It was survival. After Lean died, he had learned to move through the world the same way he moved through board meetings, efficiently, without stopping, without looking too long at anything that might remind him of something he couldn't afford to feel. His assistant, Wei, walked half a step behind him as they entered the Mingxing children's home. The building was clean, a little worn, smelling faintly of lunch and floor wax. Children's drawings covered one wall, crayon suns, lopsided houses, families with too many fingers. Rin didn't look at the drawings. We have the donation check ready, Wei said quietly. Photo opportunity with the director, brief introduction to the children, and we can be back in the car by 2:30. Good, Rin said. That was the whole of his response. The director, a small woman named Coordinator Fang, met them at the entrance with a wide smile and both hands extended. She thanked him for coming 3 times before they reached the main hall. Rin smiled back at appropriate intervals. He had learned that, too, the smile that looked real enough to satisfy a room. She introduced him to a group of children seated in a half-circle. 7 of them, ages somewhere between 4 and 8, all looking up at him with the particular curiosity that children have for large, serious adults in expensive clothes. A few of them waved. One small boy held up a drawing, clearly hoping for a reaction. Rin told them it was very good. He did not see what was in the drawing. Coordinator Fang was speaking, something about the home's new reading program, something about funding goals, and Rin was nodding in the right places when a movement at the edge of the hallway caught his eye. A girl was leaving the main room. Walking away from the group, head down, focused on something she was carrying, a single orange crayon, gripped in her small fist like it was important. She walked directly into him. The crayon hit the floor and rolled. The girl stumbled backward, caught herself, and looked up. She wasn't frightened. That was the first thing he noticed. Most children, when they bumped into a stranger, looked immediately to the nearest adult for permission to react. This girl simply looked at him, steady, quiet, a little curious, the way children look at things they haven't decided about yet. Sorry, she said. Not sorry because I was told to. Just sorry, matter of fact, and then she bent down to pick up her crayon. Rin bent at the same moment to help her. That was when he saw it. The locket hung from a thin silver chain around her neck. Oval. Small. The engraving on its face was a flowering plum blossom, 5 petals, each one so fine the lines nearly disappeared at this distance. He knew those lines. He had traced them once with his thumb, standing in a hospital hallway, the night they told him his wife's car had gone off the road. The locket had belonged to Lean. He had given it to her on their 2nd anniversary. She had worn it every day until she died. And it had been buried with her. He was certain of that. He had stood at the graveside. He had watched them lower the casket. He did not reach for it. He did not speak. For a moment, he simply could not do anything except look at it, and feel something moving inside his chest that had no name yet, not grief, not recognition, just a pressure, enormous and sourceless, like a sound too low to hear but strong enough to feel in your bones. The girl straightened up. She saw him looking at the locket. She touched it with one finger, a small protective gesture, not hiding it, just checking it was still there. It's mine, she said simply. Rin found his voice from somewhere. Where did you get it? She thought about this with the seriousness that children bring to questions adults ask too carefully. Then she said, a lady gave it to me. She said it would keep me safe until the right person found me. The hallway continued around them. Coordinator Fang was still talking. Wei was writing something on his tablet. The other children were beginning to lose interest in the large serious man and return to their own business. Rin heard none of it. What lady? He asked. His voice was very quiet. The girl shrugged, the way children shrug about things that happened before they understood the world was supposed to make sense. I don't remember her face that much, she said. But she cried when she left me here. She said it without sadness, the same way she might say it rained yesterday. It was simply a thing that had happened. Then she looked down at her crayon, decided the conversation was finished, and walked back toward the main room. Rin stood in the hallway and did not move. The locket had been buried 4 years ago. He knew this. He had not imagined the graveside. He had not imagined the casket, or the flowers Lean's mother had placed on top, white chrysanthemums, because those were Lean's favorite. He had not imagined any of it. And yet, he looked at the doorway where the girl had disappeared, and felt the question forming slowly, the way a crack forms in something that was always going to break, quiet at first, then impossible to stop. The lady who gave her that locket had cried when she walked away. Forget what? He thought. Forget whom? And how, after 4 years, after a sealed casket and a hillside grave and every long night he had spent believing she was simply gone, how was his dead wife's locket around the neck of a child no one could tell him anything about? If this story is already pulling at your heart, leave a comment and let us know what you're thinking. Subscribe and turn on notifications, this mystery is only just beginning. Rin didn't speak on the drive home. Wei sat in the front seat and said nothing either. He had worked for the chairman long enough to know the difference between silence that wanted company and silence that didn't. The city moved past the windows. Rin watched none of it. He was thinking about a locket. The first thing he did when he got home was ask Wei to pull the orphanage records on the girl. Quietly. No formal request, nothing that would raise questions. Just the intake file, whatever they kept on how she arrived and who brought her. Wei came back within the hour. The file was thin. Almost nothing. Xiao Mei had been brought to the Mingxing Children's Home 3 years ago. The woman who dropped her off gave no name, no contact information, no explanation beyond the basics. The girl needed care, she could not provide it. The staff noted that the woman seemed distressed. One record said she had difficulty leaving. Another said she sat in the parking lot for almost 20 minutes after the door closed. Then she drove away, and no one ever heard from her again. Rin read the file twice. Then he set it down and went to find the photograph. He kept only one. Not because he had destroyed the others, he simply couldn't look at them, so he had put them away in boxes he had never opened, and those boxes lived in the back of a storage room he had not entered in 4 years. But one photograph he had kept out. It sat in the drawer of his nightstand, face down. He had never been able to explain why he kept it there instead of with the others. Some part of him had needed it close. Some other part had needed it hidden. He turned it over. Lean was laughing at something off camera. Her hair was loose. It was their last anniversary dinner. He remembered the restaurant, the wine, the way she had reached across the table and covered his hand with hers for no reason, just because she wanted to. Around her neck, the locket. Oval. Silver. A flowering plum blossom etched into its face. He sat on the edge of the bed and held the photograph for a long time. He had always assumed the locket was lost in the accident. The mountain road. The ravine. Her car had gone through a barrier in the dark, and by the time they found her, there had been so much they couldn't recover, personal items, scattered on impact, carried by the water below. He had told himself the locket was among them. It was easier than thinking too carefully about it. But now a girl he had never met was wearing it. And someone had placed it around her neck on purpose. So she wouldn't forget. He called the funeral home the next morning. He wasn't certain what he was looking for, some confirmation that the locket had been buried with her, some record that would explain how it had moved from a mountain ravine to a child's neck. He needed the story to make sense. The director was apologetic, careful. He pulled the file while Rin waited. The locket, he said, was listed as not recovered from the scene. It had never been in their possession. Someone had told Rin it was placed with her. He couldn't remember now who had told him that, but the record was clear. The locket had not been at the accident site. It was not in the casket. Rin thanked him and ended the call. He sat with that for a moment. The locket had never been in the ravine. Which meant it had been somewhere else entirely on the night Lean died. In someone's hands. In someone's pocket. Somewhere a piece of his wife had survived the accident, and he had spent 4 years not knowing. That was when the other memory came back. The one he had buried even deeper than the photograph. 1 week before the accident, Lean had come to find him in his office at home. It was late. He had been working. She had stood in the doorway with an expression he hadn't been able to read, not sad exactly, not frightened, but something between the two. Something that looked like a decision she hadn't finished making. She said, "I need to tell you something. Something important." He had looked up. He had seen her face. He had said, "Can it wait until tomorrow? I just need to finish this." She had looked at him for a moment longer than felt comfortable. Then she said, "Yes. It can wait." She went to bed. He finished his work. Tomorrow came, and she didn't bring it up, and he didn't ask, and then the week passed, and then she was gone. He had never let himself think about that moment directly. He had circled around it for 4 years, approached it, retreated, approached it again. The guilt of it was shapeless and enormous. He had told himself it was just something small. Something ordinary. Something that wouldn't have changed anything. He wasn't sure he believed that anymore. The locket had been somewhere for 4 years. A woman, unnamed, unidentified, had placed it around a child's neck and said it would keep her safe until the right person found her. The same woman had cried in a parking lot for 20 minutes before driving away. The same woman had brought the child to an orphanage with no name, no explanation, no way to be found. Rin looked at the intake file again. Then at the photograph. Then at the window. Someone had known something about Lean's death that he didn't know. Someone had been close enough to her, close enough to have the locket, and had chosen, for 3 years, not to come forward. Not to find him. Not to say a word. Why? And what, exactly, had Lean been trying to tell him the week before she died, the thing that could wait, the thing that never got said, the thing he had spent 4 years pretending wasn't still waiting somewhere in the dark? If you're feeling what Rin is feeling right now, you're not alone. Leave a comment and tell us what you think that woman was hiding. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when the next chapter drops. Rin told himself he was going back to the orphanage for answers. He arranged it properly, a formal sponsorship visit, the kind corporations do when they want to fund a child's education without committing to anything permanent. Coordinator Fang was pleased. She said Xiao Mei could use the stability. She said the girl was quiet, a little closed off, but very bright. Rin nodded and said the right things. But he wasn't there for sponsorship. He was there because he couldn't stop thinking about the locket. They set him up in a small visiting room, a table, a few chairs, a window that looked out onto the courtyard. Xiao Mei came in and sat across from him without being told to. She placed a folded piece of paper on the table in front of her, smoothed it flat with both hands, and picked up a crayon. She didn't say hello. She didn't look nervous. She just started drawing. Rin watched her. He had prepared questions, careful ones, nothing that would alarm a child or alert the staff. But looking at her now, sitting there with her crayon and her calm, he found he didn't know where to start. She wasn't behaving the way he had expected. Most children, around strangers, either performed or retreated. Xiao Mei did neither. She simply existed in the room, fully occupied with whatever was forming on the paper in front of her. After a few minutes, he leaned slightly forward to see what she was drawing. A tall building. Straight lines, many windows. And beside it, in the background, a mountain, rough and dark, rising behind the structure like something that had always been there. He had seen that building before. He was almost certain of it. But he couldn't place it. "You like drawing buildings?" he asked. She considered this. "I draw what I remember," she said. "What do you remember about that one?" She looked at the paper, not at him. "The lady showed it to me once. From far away. She said someone important lived there." Rin kept his voice level. "What lady?" Xiao Mei looked up then, not suspiciously, just checking to see if the question was serious. "The one who cried when she left me here," she said. Same words as before. Same simple tone, like she was describing the weather. He tried a different direction. He had brought his phone, loaded with photographs, a casual scroll, something he could hand to a child without it seeming like an interrogation. Pictures from company events, family gatherings, anniversaries. Lean appeared in several of them. He hadn't arranged it that way on purpose. He told himself that. He passed the phone to Xiao Mei and said she could look if she wanted. She accepted it the way children accept phones, immediately comfortable, swiping slowly, looking at each image with the same serious attention she gave her drawings. Rin watched her face. He was looking for the moment she recognized Lean. The pause, the shift, some small reaction that would confirm the connection he was already half convinced was there. She swiped past Lean without stopping. Not a flicker. Not a hesitation. She moved through his wife's face as though she had never seen it. Rin felt something loosen and drop inside him. He wasn't sure if it was relief or disappointment. Then Xiao Mei stopped. She had paused on a photograph from 3 years ago, a company foundation dinner, the kind of event where everyone stood around in formal clothes and tried to look generous. Rin was in the frame at the front, shaking someone's hand. Lean was a few steps behind him, mid-conversation. And further back still, almost at the edge of the image, a woman. Standing slightly apart from the group. Not posing. Not smiling. Looking in a direction that wasn't the camera. Rin barely remembered her being there. He had no memory of who she was or why she had been at the event. She was background. She was nobody. Xiao Mei touched the screen with one finger, right on the woman's face. "That's her," she said. Rin took the phone back slowly. He looked at the photograph more carefully than he ever had. The woman was perhaps 40. Dark coat. Hair pulled back. She was turned slightly sideways, her face not fully visible, but enough, a jaw, a cheekbone, a profile that carried something heavy in it even in a photograph. He had no idea who she was. He looked up at Xiao Mei. "Are you sure?" She nodded, already returning to her drawing. "She has sad eyes," she said. Even in the picture. Ren looked at the woman again. He tried to find any memory that connected, a name, a conversation, a moment from that evening when he might have spoken to her. Nothing. She had been standing near his wife, but not beside her. Not with her. Just near. How many events had Lean attended in those final years? How many people had moved through her life that he hadn't thought to learn? He had been present at this dinner, physically, completely. And somehow this woman had been there too, close enough to Lean to matter, and Ren had looked right through her. He zoomed in on the woman's face as far as the image would allow. Blurry at that distance, but enough to see what Xiao Mei had seen. She was right. There was something in the expression, not sadness exactly. More like someone who was carrying something they couldn't put down. On the drive back, Ren sent the photograph to Wei with one instruction: find out who she is. He sat with his hands in his lap and watched the city move past the window and thought about something that had been sitting quietly at the edge of his mind since the visiting room. He had gone to the orphanage looking for information about the locket. About the unnamed woman who had brought Xiao Mei there. He had been treating it like a trail: follow the object, find the person, understand the connection. But he had been asking the wrong question. The locket had belonged to Lean. The woman in the photograph had been near Lean. The child had recognized the woman immediately, from a single blurry background image, because of something she remembered about her eyes. He had been so focused on where the locket had gone after the accident. He hadn't asked himself something simpler. Who had known Lean well enough to be trusted with it? And why had that person never once, in 4 years, come to find him? That woman in the background, who do you think she is, and what was she hiding? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when the truth starts to come out. Wei had a name by the next morning. Suwan, former personal assistant to Lean. She had worked in the household for nearly 3 years, handling Lean's schedule, her correspondence, her private appointments. She had left 6 months before the accident. The official reason for her departure was listed simply as personal circumstances. No dispute on record. No reference letter requested. Ren had never heard her name in his life. That was the first thing that unsettled him. Not the mystery of where she was now, but the basic fact that a woman had lived inside his home, had worked beside his wife every day for 3 years, and he had no memory of her at all. He called 2 people who had worked in the household during that period. Both remembered Suwan immediately. One described her as completely devoted to Lean, always there, always available, the kind of assistant who anticipated needs before they were spoken. The other paused before answering, and then said, she was loyal. But those last few months, there was tension. Between her and the rest of the staff. Ren asked what kind of tension. Hard to say. She became very private. She stopped eating lunch with everyone else. We assumed it was something personal. He thanked them and ended the calls. Private. Withdrawn. Carrying something she wasn't sharing. And then she had left, quietly, completely, 6 months before Lean died. That wasn't the timeline of someone who left over a salary dispute. He went to Lean's old desk that evening. He hadn't touched it since the first month after she died. Someone, he couldn't remember who, had offered to clear it for him, and he had said yes because he couldn't do it himself, and afterward he had simply closed the study door and not gone back. For years of mail had been rerouted. The desk had sat there, undisturbed, in a room he had stopped entering. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Something small. Something missed. He found it in the back of the bottom drawer, pushed flat against the wooden panel, a white envelope, sealed, never opened. His name was not on it. No name was on it at all. Just an address, written in Lean's handwriting on the outside, the way you write an address when you intend to mail something and then don't. He recognized Lean's handwriting immediately. Even after 4 years, it stopped him for a moment, the careful, slightly slanted characters, always a little rushed, like her thoughts arrived faster than her pen. He opened the envelope. Inside, a single folded paper. On it, written in the same hand, was a full address. An apartment building across the city. And below it, in smaller writing, Suwan. Lean had known where she was. After she left, Lean had known exactly where to find her. He went the next day. The building was quiet, residential, unremarkable. He found the apartment number and knocked. A young woman answered, clearly not Suwan, holding a coffee mug and looking surprised to find a stranger at her door. She had been living there for 2 years. She didn't know who Suwan was. The apartment had been vacant when she moved in. Management said the previous tenant had left without much notice, no forwarding information, nothing passed on. Ren thanked her and turned to go. The woman said, wait, I did find something when I moved in. Stuffed behind the radiator. I nearly threw it out. She disappeared for a moment and came back with a small notebook. Soft cover, dark blue, edges worn. She handed it over with the easy generosity of someone passing along something that was never theirs to keep. Rin took it and walked back to his car. He didn't open it immediately. He sat with it in his hands for a moment, feeling its weight, which was almost nothing. Then he opened the cover. The handwriting inside was not Lean's. Smaller, more controlled, the handwriting of someone who had learned to be careful with words. He turned through the pages slowly. Dates, fragments, observations. Suwon had used the notebook like a private record of something she was trying to process. The entries from the early pages were ordinary, errands, appointments, small notes to herself. But as the dates moved forward, the entries shortened. Became more compressed. By the final pages, she was writing single sentences, widely spaced, as if she had too much to say and had decided to say almost none of it. The last entry was near the back. He almost missed it. She made me promise. I have kept it. But every day I ask myself, was it mercy or was it cruelty? That was all. Below it, nothing. Rin sat with that sentence for a long time. The car was quiet around him. Outside, people walked past on the pavement, entirely unconcerned with the fact that his entire understanding of the last 4 years was shifting beneath him. Lean had made Suwon promise something. Something significant enough that keeping it had cost Suwon sleep, had pressed her down until she left the city and left no forwarding address, had reduced her to writing one sentence in a notebook and then stopping entirely because there was nothing more she could safely write. Was it mercy or was it cruelty? Those were not the words of someone who had helped Lean with her calendar. He turned the last written page, looking for more. There was nothing on the back of the final entry. But the next page, the one after, was not blank. At the top, in handwriting he recognized immediately, were 4 words and a name. Lean's handwriting. Not Suwon's. Lean had written in this notebook herself, just once, on the page after the last entry, as if she had picked it up and added something that couldn't wait or couldn't be said any other way. What she had written was the full name of an institution. The Mingxing Children's Home. Xiaomei's Orphanage. Written by his dead wife's hand, in another woman's notebook, for reasons he could not yet begin to explain. Whatever Lean made Suwon promise, it led directly to that child. Leave your theories in the comments, because this story is about to go somewhere none of us expected. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss Chapter 5. There was a name written in the margin of Suwon's notebook. Small, almost incidental, the kind of note you write for yourself, not for anyone who might find it later. A doctor's name. A clinic across the city. Rin called that morning. The doctor was retired, but not unreachable. He agreed to meet, though his voice on the phone was careful in the way that people are careful when they know they're holding something that belongs to someone else. They sat in the doctor's home study, books on every wall, afternoon light through old curtains, and the doctor looked at Rin for a long moment before he spoke. As if he was deciding, one final time, whether to say it. Then he said it. Lean had come to him privately. 18 months before the accident. She had been experiencing symptoms for some time but had waited, too long, the doctor had told her, before seeking answers. The diagnosis was a degenerative neurological condition. Progressive. Irreversible. The timeline he had given her was 2 to 4 years. Rin sat very still. She told no one, he asked. No one, the doctor said. She was very clear about that. She didn't want, he paused, chose his words carefully, she didn't want to change how people looked at her. How you looked at her. Rin thought about the last 18 months of their marriage. The way Lean had sometimes gone quiet in the middle of a meal. The morning she said she was tired and he hadn't asked why. The night she stood in his office doorway with something important to say and he told her it could wait until tomorrow. He hadn't noticed. He had been there, completely, and he had not noticed. She was protecting me, Rin said. The doctor nodded quietly. That was my understanding of her, yes. Everything rearranged itself on the drive home. It made sense now. All of it. Lean had known she was dying, not from the accident, but from something already growing inside her. She had begun quietly preparing. Closing things up. Giving things away. Suwon had been her only confidant, her keeper of impossible promises, her silent partner in a plan Lean hadn't been able to finish before the car went off the road. And Xiaomei, a child Lean had been quietly sponsoring through some earlier charitable connection, had received the locket as a final act. A symbolic protection. A piece of Lean placed around a child's neck so that some part of her care would continue after she was gone. It was exactly the kind of thing Lean would do. That was what made it land so completely. Rin had spent 4 years not understanding his wife's final year, and now he understood it, and the understanding hurt in a clean, honest way that grief is supposed to hurt. Not like a mystery. Like a loss. He called Wei from the car. He said he wanted to begin the adoption paperwork for Xiaomei. Wei was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll start it today. He went to the orphanage 2 days later to begin the formal process. Coordinator Fang was warm, efficient, clearly pleased. She moved through the paperwork with him step by step, forms, signatures, declarations, the small bureaucratic architecture of a decision that would change 2 lives. Halfway through, she paused at one page and said, "I just need to confirm her records for the official filing." She read aloud, name, intake date, estimated birth year. Ren signed the line below. Then his hand slowed. He looked up from the page. What was that last part? Coordinator Fang repeated it. Xiao Mei's birth year. Ren set the pen down. He did the arithmetic without meaning to. It happened the way arithmetic sometimes does, automatically, before you've decided you want the answer. If that birth year was accurate, Xiao Mei had been born 4 years before the accident. 4 years before Lin died. And she had been placed in the orphanage 3 years ago, meaning she had been alive, somewhere, for at least a year before Lin's death. He had assumed Lin's charitable connection to this child came from the orphanage sponsorship work she had begun in her final years. He had assumed Xiao Mei was a child Lin discovered through that channel, someone she had encountered while quietly preparing for the end. But the sponsorship program hadn't existed yet when Xiao Mei was born. He knew this precisely because he had helped Lin establish it. He remembered the dinner conversation where she had first mentioned wanting to do it. He remembered the year. Xiao Mei had already been alive for years by then. Coordinator Fang was watching him. Is everything all right? Yes, Ren said. He picked up the pen. He finished the signature. But his mind was no longer in the room. The explanation he had built so carefully over the last 2 days was still standing, but something underneath it had shifted. One piece did not fit. One date was wrong by years. And if the charitable connection wasn't how Lin had known about Xiao Mei, if that path didn't exist yet when this child was born, then there was a different path. An earlier one. One he hadn't found yet. He drove home with the completed paperwork in his bag and Suwant's notebook on the passenger seat. He picked up the notebook at a red light and held it without opening it, the way you hold something you're not sure you're ready for. Lin had written the orphanage name in this notebook. Not Suwan Lin. In her own hand, on the page after Suwant's final entry. He had assumed she wrote it because of the sponsorship. Because she had arranged for Xiao Mei to be placed there through some charitable network. But if the timeline was wrong, if Xiao Mei had been born before any of that existed, then the question wasn't how Lin had found this child. The question was how Lin had known her from the very beginning. Something in this story just shifted, did you feel it? Leave a comment with what you think is really going on. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the truth is going to be bigger than any of us expected. Ren called the doctor that same evening. Not a request this time. He told the doctor he was coming back in the morning, and that he needed the complete truth, not the version that had been kind enough to share, but all of it. Every detail. Every omission. The doctor was quiet on the phone for a long moment. Then he said, "Come at 9. He was already seated when Ren arrived, both hands flat on the desk in front of him, the posture of a man who had decided, sometime in the night, to stop carrying something he had held too long. "There is one thing I didn't tell you," the doctor said. "I didn't tell you because she asked me not to. But you already know part of it now, and I think," he stopped. Started again. "I think she would have wanted you to know the rest." Ren said nothing. He waited. The doctor told him that when Lin first came to the clinic, before the diagnosis, before any of that, she had come about something else. A pregnancy. One that had occurred before her marriage to Ren. Before she had known him at all, or so Ren assumed. She had not continued the pregnancy. That had been her decision, and the clinic had confirmed it was carried out. She had left believing it was finished. She had moved forward with her life, married Ren, built everything they had built together, with that chapter closed. Except it wasn't closed. Ren looked at the doctor. "What do you mean it wasn't closed?" The doctor reached into a folder and placed a single page on the desk. A copy of a record from a separate clinic, smaller, private, the kind of place that doesn't appear in directories. Suwan had found the reference in Lin's papers. She had flagged it in the notebook margin with a question mark, one of the small notations Ren had noticed but not understood when he first read through the entries. The record told a different story than the one Lin had been given. The procedure she believed had ended the pregnancy had not been completed as intended. There had been a complication, or perhaps something more deliberate, though the record was careful not to say so directly. The child had survived. Had been born. And had been placed into the care system without Lin's knowledge, under a name she had never been told, in a city she hadn't been watching. The clinic had documented it. Filed it away. And said nothing to the woman who had come to them trusting that they would carry out her instructions. Ren sat with that for a moment. A decision Lin believed she had made, had been unmade without her consent, without her knowledge. A child who existed in the world while Lin lived her entire married life not knowing. When did she find out? He asked. 4 years ago, the doctor said. From her assistant. The woman, Suwan, came across a reference to the clinic record by accident, while managing some of Lin's personal papers. She brought it to Lin. 4 years ago. The same year Lin's diagnosis arrived. The same year she stood in Ren's office doorway with something important to say and he told her it could wait. He pressed his hands together on his knees and said nothing. The doctor continued quietly. Once Lin knew, she spent her remaining time trying to find the child. She had so little to work from, a birth date, a city, an intake record that had been filed under a different name. Suwan helped her. They searched carefully, privately, without involving anyone who might ask questions Lin wasn't ready to answer. They found her. A girl named Xiao Mei, living in the Mingxing children's home. Lin never visited, she was afraid that appearing in person would alert the wrong people, trigger something she couldn't control. But she made her plan. She gave Suwan the locket and the address. She told Suwan what to do when the time came. And then the road, and the mountain, and the dark. And she ran out of time. Ren looked at the window for a moment. Outside, the morning was ordinary and indifferent. People were walking to work. Somewhere in the city, a little girl was sitting in an orphanage room drawing a building beside a mountain, wearing her mother's locket, waiting for a right person who had taken 4 years to arrive. Her mother. Lin. The locket wasn't charity. It wasn't a final act of generosity toward a sponsored stranger. It was a mother reaching through the only channel she had left, a piece of silver, a familiar engraving, a quiet instruction to a trusted woman, to mark her child so she could be found. The grief that moved through Ren then was different from anything he had felt before. Not the grief of loss. The grief of understanding. Of realizing how much had been happening inside a life he thought he knew completely. He picked up the folder. He looked through the records more carefully than the doctor had walked him through them. Birth date, intake information, the reference codes from the original clinic. And there, in the margin of the notebook page Suwan had flagged, a notation he had passed over earlier because it meant nothing to him at the time. A name. Written in Suwan's careful hand, beside the column that listed parental information on the original birth record. Ren stared at it. He knew this name. Not distantly, not the way you know a name from a news article or a business directory. He knew it the way you know someone you have shaken hands with dozens of times. Someone you had trusted. Someone who was, at this exact moment, still present in his professional life, still sitting across from him at meetings, still calling him by the name that old friends use. His mind moved through the implication slowly, the way you walk carefully when you're not sure the floor will hold. The pregnancy had occurred before Lin married Ren. The timing, the doctor had said, placed it clearly before their relationship began. That was what Ren had assumed. That was what made it easier to hold. But the name in the margin wasn't a stranger's name. And now the question he hadn't thought to ask, the one that had been sitting beneath all the others, waiting, finally surfaced. Before they met. That was what he had told himself. That was what he had needed it to be. But was it? This story just changed everything we thought we knew. Leave a comment and tell us whose name you think was in that margin. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is where it all starts to break open. Rin had known Haochen for 19 years. They had started their first company together in a rented office with second-hand furniture and no air conditioning. They had shaken hands on deals worth hundreds of millions. They had sat beside each other at funerals, at weddings, at the kind of dinners where men say things they mean because they've had enough wine and trust each other enough to mean them. Rin had called him the morning after finding the name in the margin. He said only, "I need to see you." Not at the office. Haochen had gone quiet in a way that answered the question before they even met. They sat in Rin's home study, the same room where Lin used to keep her desk, the same room where Rin had found the envelope. He had not chosen the location consciously. But standing there now, across from the man whose name had been written in a dead woman's notebook beside a child's birth record, it felt like the right place to have this conversation. Rin put the notebook on the table between them. He didn't open it. He just placed it there. Haochen looked at it. Then he looked at Rin. And he didn't deny anything. He didn't perform surprise or confusion or the particular kind of offense that innocent people reach for first. He just said, "How much do you know?" "Enough," Rin said. "Tell me the rest." The story came out in pieces, the way things do when someone has rehearsed not saying them for years. Haochen had known Lin before Rin did. They had been together briefly, months, not years, and it had ended before anyone was hurt, before it became anything permanent. When Lin met Rin, Haochen had stepped back. That was how he described it. Stepped back. As if it had been graceful. As if it had cost him nothing. He claimed he hadn't known about the pregnancy. Rin watched his face while he said this and decided, after a moment, to believe it, not because Houchin deserved the benefit of the doubt, but because the alternative meant the last 19 years had been built on something even worse, and Rin needed to move through this without stopping. What Houchin admitted next was harder. Lean had come to him. Toward the end, when she was running out of time and she knew it. She had told him the truth, the child existed, the child was his, and she needed his help to find her and bring her home before Lean was gone. He had refused. Not immediately. He had taken a few days first, which was somehow worse, a few days of letting Lean believe he might say yes, while he calculated what it would cost him. His reputation. His family. The version of himself he had spent decades carefully constructing. And then he had told her no. Rin sat with that for a long moment. The room was very quiet. She came to you dying, Rin said. She asked you for one thing. Houchin didn't answer. There was nothing to say that would help. She ran out of time, Rin continued. His voice was steady in the way that very controlled anger is steady. She was trying to find her daughter, and she ran out of time, and part of the reason she ran out of time is that you said no. Houchin looked at the table. Yes, he said quietly. That single word sat in the room like something heavy that had finally been put down after being carried too long. Rin ended the meeting without raising his voice. He didn't have to. Some things don't require volume. He drove to the orphanage, completed the trial visit paperwork, and brought Xiaomei back to the house for the weekend, the first of what the coordinator called familiarization visits. A gentle way of saying, let the child learn if this place could become home. Xiaomei moved through the house quietly, examining things without touching them. She looked at the bookshelves. She looked at the kitchen with its wide windows and the courtyard garden beyond them. She stopped in doorways and assessed rooms with the careful attention of someone who has learned not to assume they're allowed to stay. Rin watched her from a distance and said nothing. He understood, without needing to explain it, that this kind of trust could not be rushed. Then she found the photograph. It was in the hallway, framed, hanging at the height of an adult's eye level and a child's lifted gaze. A photograph from several years ago, Lean at a summer gathering, caught mid-laugh, her head turned slightly toward the camera like she hadn't expected the picture to be taken. She looked entirely like herself. Unposed. Alive. Xiaomei stopped walking. She stood in front of the photograph for a long time. Not reaching for it. Not asking about it. Just standing there, looking up, in the particular stillness of someone who has recognized something they cannot explain. Rin stayed where he was in the doorway behind her. Finally, without turning around, Xiaomei said, I used to dream about her. I didn't know her name. She said it the way children say things that destroy you, simply, without understanding the weight of what they're carrying. Then she moved on down the hallway, still exploring, still quiet, the locket around her neck catching the light as she walked. Rin stayed in the doorway for a long time after she was gone. That evening, after Xiaomei was asleep in the guest room, his phone showed a message from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't open it. The message was short. No introduction, no name. Just a few lines. I heard she found you. I'm glad. There is one more thing, something Lean asked me to give you directly, not through the notebook. She wasn't ready to write it down. I am ready now to deliver it. Tell me when. He read it twice. Then he looked at the contact name he'd saved years ago in a different context entirely, finally matching the number. Su Wan. She had been watching. Waiting to see if Ren would find his way here on his own. And now that he had, now that Xiaomei was sleeping in this house, and Houchin's refusal had been named out loud, and Lin's long, private, impossible year had finally been seen, there was still something left. Something Lin had not been willing to put in writing. Something she had trusted only to the woman who had kept every other promise. Suwan has been waiting all this time, and whatever Lin couldn't write down, it must be the thing that changes everything. Leave a comment with what you think it is, and subscribe with notifications on so you're here when the final truth comes out. Suwan had chosen a small city 3 hours away by train. Not hiding exactly, just far enough that no one would find her by accident. She was already seated when Ren arrived, at a corner table in a quiet cafe, hands around a cup she hadn't been drinking from. She looked up when he walked in, and he recognized her immediately from the photograph, the same careful posture, the same quality of stillness, as if she had spent years learning to take up as little space as possible. She had been carrying this for 4 years. It showed. They didn't spend time on introductions. There wasn't much to say about who they were to each other, both of them connected by a woman who was no longer here, sitting across a table because of everything she had left unfinished. Suwan reached into her bag and placed a small device on the table between them. A voice recorder, old, the kind that uses physical buttons. She set it down carefully, the way you handle something that belongs to someone else. She recorded this 3 weeks before the accident, Suwan said. She made me promise to give it to you only if the girl was found. Only if you had already found her yourself. She pressed play. And then she folded her hands in her lap and looked at the window, giving Rin the privacy of not being watched. Lean's voice came through the small speaker, thin and slightly unsteady, not frightened, but tired in the deep way that illness makes people tired. The voice of someone who had stopped pretending they weren't running out of time. She did not begin with an apology. She said, "I'm not asking you to forgive me for the secrets. I'm asking you to understand why I kept them." She told him about the pregnancy, not Hao-chen's name, not the circumstances, but the part that mattered most, what had happened to her afterward. She had signed paperwork she hadn't read carefully enough. She had trusted a clinic because someone had recommended it, and she was frightened and alone and not thinking clearly. She had walked out believing it was finished, and she had spent the following years understanding, slowly, what it meant to make a permanent decision in a temporary state of panic. She had not told Rin because the shame of it was specific, not shame about Hao-chen, not about the choice itself, but about her own carelessness. She had lost a child through her own inattention. That was how she had lived with it for years. Not as a tragedy that happened to her, but as a failure she had authored. "I didn't want you to know that version of me," her voice said. "The one who signed without reading. The one who trusted the wrong people. I wanted to be the person you thought I was." The cafe was very quiet around them. Someone at the counter dropped a spoon and it rang against the floor, and Rin heard none of it. Then Lin said, "When she found out the child was alive, when Suwan brought her the clinic records and the truth became impossible to hold, she didn't tell Rin because she needed to correct her own mistake herself. Not because she didn't trust him. Because she couldn't ask him to carry something that was hers to carry. She had made the error. She would repair it. I know what you would have done," her voice said. "You would have put everything down and helped me. You would have made it your problem the moment I made it yours. And I couldn't let you do that. Not for this. Not for something I should have seen coming." Rin's hands were completely still on the table. Her final words on the recording came slowly, with a pause before them, the pause of someone choosing carefully, for the last time. "If you are hearing this, you already love her. You don't need me to ask you. You already said yes." The recording ended. The small device sat between them, silent. Rin did not move for a long time. Not from grief. He had grieved Lin in every form grief takes, the sharp kind, the slow kind, the kind that arrives without warning years later in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. He knew what grief felt like. This was different. This was recognition. She had recorded those words not knowing when he would hear them, not knowing if he ever would, and she had been exactly right. About all of it. About what he would have done if she'd told him. About the fact that he had already said yes to Xiaomei before he fully understood what he was saying yes to. About who he was, in the specific and quiet way that only the people who have known us longest can see us clearly. She had known him that well. Right until the end. And she had used that knowledge not to ask for help, but to protect him from having to give it. He pressed his hands flat on the table. He breathed. Across from him, Suwan was still looking at the window. Giving him time. She had waited for years. A few more minutes cost her nothing. When he was ready, he looked up. Suwan turned back to him. She read his face with the practiced attention of someone who had spent years managing things that couldn't be said directly. "There is one more thing," she said. Her voice was quiet but very steady. "I need you to hear it." She reached into her bag again. This time she placed a document on the table, printed, folded once. She did not open it for him. The clinic that separated them, it wasn't negligence. It wasn't a mistake. She paused. Someone paid them. Someone arranged for the child to be placed away from Lin specifically. Someone who knew about the pregnancy and did not want Lin connected to a child from another man. Someone who wanted her life to remain clean. Rin looked at her. Someone who wanted her available, Suwan said. For the life that had already been planned for her. She slid the document across the table. Rin unfolded it. He read the name at the top of the payment authorization, the person whose account had funded the clinic's arrangement, whose signature had set the entire sequence in motion before Lin ever knew a child had been born. He read it once. Then again. Then he went very still, in the way that people go still when the ground beneath them has shifted so completely that moving feels dangerous. He knew this name better than almost any name in his life. Whatever name Rin just read on that document, it changes everything that came before it. Leave a comment with your theory, and subscribe with notifications on so you don't miss the chapter where it all comes apart. He sat in his car outside his own house for 40 minutes before going inside. The document was on the passenger seat. He didn't need to look at it again. He had read the name once, and then he had folded it, and then he had driven, not home, not anywhere specific, just driven, because his body needed to be moving while his mind worked through what his eyes had just told him. His mother's name. On a payment authorization. Dated before Xiao Mei's first birthday. He had spent weeks building a picture of what had happened to Lin. A cruel clinic. A careless mistake. A pregnancy that slipped through the cracks of a system that didn't care enough to notice. That was the story he had been carrying. That was the story he had accepted. It was wrong. The clinic had not made a careless mistake. Someone had contacted them. Someone had explained the situation, a young woman, unmarried, a pregnancy she believed was being ended, a child who, if it survived, would complicate a very specific future that someone else had already planned. Someone had transferred money. Someone had arranged for the child to be placed far enough away that Lin would never accidentally find her. And then that same someone had watched Lin marry Ren. Had attended the wedding. Had sat at the family table at every holiday for years afterward, managing things, maintaining things, keeping the estate running with the quiet authority of a woman who considered the household, and everyone in it, her responsibility to oversee. His mother had not caused Lin's death. He held on to that. It was the one clean edge in everything he was looking at. But she had taken away the one thing that might have made Lin fight harder to live. A daughter. A reason beyond love and marriage and the life they had built together, something that was entirely Lin's own, that belonged only to her, that no illness and no quiet household management and no careful control could reach. His mother had removed that before Lin even knew it existed. He went through everything on the drive. Not frantically, methodically, the way he approached problems that mattered. One memory at a time. The months after the funeral, when his mother had moved through his home with such careful efficiency, organizing, redirecting staff, gently steering him away from the charity work Lin had started and toward the more manageable business of grief. He had called it kindness. He had been grateful. The times he had mentioned continuing Lin's sponsorship programs and his mother had said, softly, that it might be better to let professionals handle it. That he was still healing. That Lin would have understood. Lin would have understood. She had used those exact words more than once. As if she knew what Lin would have wanted. As if she had the right to speak for a woman she had systematically prevented from having the one thing she spent her final year searching for. He parked in front of the house and sat with the engine off. Inside, Xiaomei was asleep in the spare room. He had checked on her before leaving that morning. She had been curled up with one arm around a stuffed animal the housekeeper had quietly placed there, her face completely relaxed in the specific way children sleep when they feel, for the first time, that they don't need to stay alert. Lin had known what his mother did. He was certain of it now, certain in the way you become certain about things that were always true and simply hadn't been spoken yet. She had found out in those final weeks. She had looked at the document, or something like it, and she had understood exactly who had taken her daughter from her before she ever had the chance to be her mother. And she had said nothing to Ren. She had gone to Suwon. She had made her plans with the locket and the address and the quiet instruction to wait until the right person came. She had recorded her voice onto a small device so that he would hear her one more time when the time was right. And she had kept her mother-in-law's name out of all of it. Because she knew what it would cost him to know. He went inside. The house was quiet. He stood in the hallway for a moment and looked at the spare room door, slightly open, the soft sound of a child's breathing just audible in the stillness. He looked at it for a long time. She had sacrificed her own justice so he would not have to choose. Between his mother and her memory. Between what was true and what he could survive. She had looked at the full picture of what had been done to her, and she had decided that Ren had already lost enough. He was still standing there when he heard the front door. His mother had a key. She had always had a key. She arrived unannounced the way people do when they have decided, over many years, that they have the right to. She stepped into the hallway, already speaking, something about the week, something about dinner, and then she stopped. She had seen the shoes by the door. Small shoes. A child's shoes, neatly placed to one side the way coordinator Fang had clearly taught Xiaomei to leave them. His mother looked at the shoes for a moment. Then she looked up at Ren. Something moved across her face, fast, controlled, almost invisible. But it was there. The first crack in 4 years of perfect composure. Because she understood immediately. She was a woman who had always understood things immediately, and she understood this, the child was here. The child Lin had spent her final year looking for. The child she had spent years believing was safely gone. The silence between them stretched. Ren looked at his mother, really looked at her, the way he hadn't in years, with everything he now knew sitting behind his eyes, and said, very quietly, "I know everything." She didn't deny it. She didn't perform surprise. She stood in his hallway with her coat still on and looked at him with the expression of someone who had known, for a long time, that this moment was coming, and had spent years deciding what to say when it did. "Your wife asked me not to tell you," she said. Her voice was steady. "She said you had already suffered enough. The words landed like something physical. Rin stood completely still. Lean had found out. She had known. And in the last weeks of her life, knowing everything his mother had done, knowing exactly who had taken her daughter from her, knowing exactly what that cost had been, she had looked at this woman and chosen not to destroy her. For his sake. She had asked his mother for mercy on his behalf. And his mother, for whatever reason, from whatever complicated place that decision had come from, had kept that promise too. Lean protected everyone right until the very end, even the person who hurt her most. Leave a comment and tell us how you feel about that. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here for the final chapter, where everything comes to rest. Rin met his mother the following morning. Not at the house. At the estate offices, her territory, the place she had managed for 4 years with the quiet authority of someone who had decided, after Lean died, that her son's grief was also her jurisdiction. He had asked her to be there at 9. She arrived at 8:50, which was her way of saying she was ready. He told her what he knew. All of it. Not to hurt her, he had moved past that in the night, but because she deserved to hear it said plainly, without softening, by the one person she had tried to protect through all of it. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, he told her his decision. He was not going to expose her. He was not going to bring lawyers into it, or make phone calls that would end with her name in places she couldn't control. He had thought about it. He would be lying if he said he hadn't, and then he had thought about Lean, who had known everything and said nothing, and he had understood that destroying his mother was not something Lean would have wanted him to spend his life on. But there were things that were going to change. She would step down from the estate board. Her management role, the one she had expanded so carefully in the months after the funeral, would end. The charity programs Lean had started, the ones his mother had quietly discouraged him from continuing, would be revived and funded properly. And there was one more thing. You will never be in a room alone with Xiao Mei, he said. Not once. Not for any reason. If you are present, I am present. That is not a request. His mother looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression, not defiance, not quite remorse, but something between the two that was perhaps the closest she could get to either. All right, she said quietly. That was all. One word, and 4 years of managed grief and careful control began, at last, to belong to the past. Houchen called that afternoon. Rin didn't answer. He received a message an hour later, brief, formal, the language of a man who had finally run out of ways to defer, a resignation from the partnership, effective immediately, no counteroffer requested. Rin read it once and set the phone down. He did not call back. He did not pursue it legally. Lean had chosen not to pursue it, and that choice belonged to her, not to him, and he was not going to undo it simply because it would have felt satisfying. The friendship was over. The business was over. That was enough. Some debts get paid in the currency of absence, and Houchen would spend the rest of his life knowing exactly what his refusal had cost a woman who deserved better. That was its own kind of justice. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday. A quiet room, a notary, coordinator Fang beaming from one side of the table like she had personally arranged the whole thing. Xiao Mei sat beside Rin in a chair that was slightly too tall for her, feet not quite reaching the floor. She watched the paperwork move across the table with serious attention, the way she watched most things, completely, without missing anything. When the coordinator asked if she had any questions before they finalized, Xiao Mei looked at Rin and said, "Do I have to change my name?" Rin looked at her. "No," he said. "You can keep everything you already have." She considered this, nodded once with the gravity of someone who had just confirmed something important, and returned her attention to the paperwork. Coordinator Fang pretended she wasn't tearing up. She was not entirely successful. Outside on the orphanage steps, waiting for the car, Xiao Mei reached up and unclipped the locket from her neck. She had never opened it in front of him. He hadn't asked her to, it was hers, and whatever was inside it was hers too. But now she held it in both palms and pressed the small clasp with her thumbnail, carefully, the way you open something you've been meaning to open for a while but wanted to wait for the right moment. The locket came apart. Inside, where a locket usually holds a photograph sized for the space, there was something smaller, a picture folded down to fit, the edges worn soft from years of being folded and folded again. Xiao Mei held it out to him without asking whether he wanted to see it. She seemed to know he did. Rin took it carefully. He opened it. Lean. Younger than he had ever known her, before they met, before the marriage, before the illness had quietly begun its work. She was looking at the camera with an expression he had never seen on her face in any photograph he owned. Not the poised smile of an anniversary dinner, not the caught mid-laugh of a candid shot. Something rawer than that. Something that looked like a woman making a decision about who she intended to be. And in her arms, an infant. Newborn, eyes closed, held with the careful inexperience of someone who had never held a baby before and was trying very hard to do it correctly. She had been there. At the clinic. Before the separation. She had asked someone to take this photograph, and she had placed it inside the locket, and she had carried it through everything that followed, through the years she thought the child was gone, through the marriage, through the diagnosis, through the desperate final search, the way you carry proof of something you can't stop believing in even when every reason to believe has been taken from you. She had always known the child was real. She had never stopped knowing. Ren folded the photograph back along its worn creases. He held it in his closed hand for a moment. Then he placed it back inside the locket and handed it to Xiaomei. She clipped it back around her neck. Then she looked up at him with the direct, uncomplicated attention she brought to everything. She said the right person would find me, Xiaomei said. Did she mean you? Ren looked at her, this small, serious person who drew the same building over and over, who recognized a woman's face in a dream before she knew her name, who had stood in a hallway and bumped into a stranger and changed everything, and felt the question settle into him the way true things settle, without drama, without needing to be argued. He couldn't answer immediately. There was too much inside the answer. Then, I think she meant both of us. Xiaomei seemed to accept this. She looked at the locket for a moment, touching it once with her fingertip the way she always did, just checking it was there, and then she looked out at the courtyard where the other children were playing, and the morning was just a morning, ordinary and full of noise. 3 months later, Ren stood at the window of the Mingxing children's home. The sign above the entrance had a new line beneath the original name. 4 characters. Lin's name, followed by the word for foundation. He had arranged it quietly, without ceremony. He didn't think Lin would have wanted a ceremony. Below the window, in the courtyard, Xiaomei was running. Not toward anything, just running, the way children run when they have enough space and no particular reason to stop. Her locket caught the light as she moved, flashing silver once, twice, and then she turned a corner and disappeared behind a group of other children and he lost sight of her for a moment. He waited. She reappeared, still running, entirely unconcerned with whether he was watching. He thought about a locket that had traveled from a hospital room to a mountain road to a woman's careful keeping to a child's neck and finally to a hallway where a man who had stopped feeling things walked into someone who needed to be found. Lin had not left a map. She had not left instructions or demands or accusations. She had left a door, slightly open, and trusted that the right person would eventually notice the light coming through it. He had taken 4 years. He wished he had been faster. He thought he probably always would. But he was here now. They both were. The courtyard was full of noise and movement, and somewhere in the middle of it Xiaomei was running, wearing her mother's locket, carrying forward the thing Lin had never stopped believing, that love, left carefully enough in the right place, will eventually find the person it was always meant for. This story has been living in our hearts since chapter 1, thank you for staying until the end. If Lin's love moved you, leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Subscribe and keep notifications on, we have more stories like this one waiting for you.